town supposed to deal with individual owners. It's not only as far as the type of construction and that type of thing, but also the nature of the business going in. How do you envision that tying into?
Well, I think the way we're envisioning this working is that we are setting some restrictions through the submittal and hopefully approval of this project. There will be some limitations as to the types of users that will be allowed to come in and be allowed to occupy or develop any of these facilities. So the town would still be dealing with one entity, that would be the developers of this. Within that, the developer is creating a list of restrictions of use, restrictions of appearance, that the board will be voting on and approving. So thereby, I think in essence, the town is still dealing with one user.
Okay, but now, instead of, when we first envisioned this, we were talking about a particular building where the town would talk about the construction, architecture, and these types of things, but also the type of business activity going on inside. And it's my understanding of the ordinance that if, say, in the office retail use, so one of the offices was a real estate office, and we approved it for that, and then later on it wanted to be changed to something, another particularly different kind of business. They'd have to come back to the town and negotiate the use of that structure for a new type of business.
I think there was a way that this could be structured, and it's been done on other projects, where there isn't necessarily a specific list of uses that are allowed. It's a list of specific uses that are not allowed. Where it would be like adult establishments, or an establishment that would be open 24 hours a day, a fast food establishment, something like that. Whereas the council would review that, and I'm sure there's give and take back and forth between the council and the developer within those allowable uses that could go in.
Just looking in your in the language in the ordinance, there's a list of 19 provisions that are applicable to what you're talking about. One of them is about the proposed use of all land and structures, including number of residential or total square footage of any non-residential. So that would be something like, commercial, this is office, or this is retail, or this is commercial, that kind of use. But there is another provision that says that the petition has to provide a site plan and supporting information that specifies the actual use or uses intended for the property and any rules, regulations, and conditions in addition to what the ordinance requires will govern the development and use of the property. So you do have some flexibility over including conditions about particular use. You might not get down to, and I'm not meaning to show favoritism over one brand or the other, but, I'll use it in a non-favoritism way. Patsy's ice cream store versus Jean's ice cream store. You can't get that specific, but you could get down as far as, perhaps a restaurant that's only so many square feet, so many seats, those kind of specific, so many parking spaces.
Why didn't you propose it as an inclusive list of, say, 3 or 4 dozen type of establishments rather than specifically just listing a few exclusive things?
Because I think it's much easier to produce an exclusive list. There are certain more easily identifiable uses that are have a higher annoyance factor, if you will.
To know exactly what we are doing, and based on that, and because there is so much information, I'd like to make a motion that we table this request until the January meeting for action at that time, and hope that in the meantime, a number of us would meet with the developers, visit some of their developments, ask our questions, and be prepared to take action in January.
Well, that's a good idea.
And I think we would invite that. Let me, then, if it's all right with you, I think I can get through the rest of these, just for the public, do it this time in another couple minutes, and I think.
You'll second it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, is there any discussion? All in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Thank you very much.
Go after those types.
But you're not talking about fast food.
Well, you could have, when I call it fast food, Zaxby's is a decent restaurant that caters to families, but it has a drive-through. But it's not what I call a drive-through McDonald's, or you can go in and get decent food there. So we wouldn't put a Sonic here, but you know, it's just a matter of how we classify this. But that's the reason we push this the furthest point away.
So you could almost get to the point where you could say 65% of the meals are consumed in the store versus drive-through.
Correct.
Yeah, except for that's a little hard to try to regulate. A better kind of thing to think of would be no drive-throughs for restaurants, or certain square footage for restaurants, because most restaurants, different types of restaurants, are going to be driven by the square footage or the seating capacity. So you could do it that way as opposed to,
Okay.
you know, the types of meals. We don't want Mike out there all the time checking up on how many people
Well, I
are
was
eating
thinking
in
more
and out.
on their national average.
Yes, yes. But I think a better way to regulate it is by square footage and by no drive-through for restaurants. If you're going to have, you can't say just no drive-throughs at all, because you're going to have, if you're going to have banks somewhere else, you have to think about drive-throughs or hours for drive-throughs, et cetera.
All these things, we will deed restrict this land against ever any adult bookstores, nightclubs, bars, dance halls, and those type things that will run with these deeds, so that if I'm dead and gone in 20, 25 years from now, anybody that comes in here, say this drugstore goes here, then the drugstore goes out and sells to Ace Hardware store. I'm just going to use that. That restriction is going to run with that land forever.
But in conditional zoning, isn't it such that if you put in a plan, it's all approved, you know, what you're putting in a restaurant, a bank, whatever, and then let's say 4 years from now, the restaurant goes belly up, they want to put in a hardware store, that has to come back to be approved again, doesn't it?
If you had made it square feet with no drive-throughs, if it's that specific but not so specific as it's got to be either a drugstore versus a hardware store, then you could have a different commercial use as long as it met those other conditions, square footage, no drive-throughs, whatever.
Yeah, you could have a use there that could change.
Of approval, that you would probably have no problem coming up with the materials and color schedule. Is that?
No, it's fine. We can pick stone, brick, shingle. I certainly can.
And Madam Mayor, I just would remind the council members that under open meetings law, if there's a quorum of the group, then it's got to be an official meeting with appropriate notice, et cetera. So just to remind you that if you sally forth from here, to make sure that you do it under the open meetings law requirements.
Two at a time.
Two at a time.
2 by 2.
So it can't be no more than two?
It can be 1 or 2, but no more.
Shelby, we have a vote.
Did we vote on that motion?
Yeah, no.
Okay, all in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Okay, we will go to the next item on our agenda, which is discussion of establishing an ABC system for Weaverville.
Madam Mayor, back, I believe it's in April of '07, the town voted for a system or have an ABC store in the town of Weaverville. The mixed drinks failed, but the store passed. Since that time, we've had numerous conversations and discussions with other, the way that we need to do this. We've also spent several weeks looking at it. I would suggest, since we have a majority of the board being new council members, that we establish a date of January the 15th for a workshop